Constitution on the pretext of internal disturbances. Many would call it the darkest chapter of Indian democracy, but one thing is very clear: it was one of the most controversial period of Indian politics, Indian polity, particularly of that of independent India's history. In this special presentation, we're going to decode what led to emergency, its political ramifications, and how it actually changed or turned the political discourse by uniting the then opposition. And last but not the least, the important lessons learned. And to do so, we're extremely glad, extremely honored to have with us Dr. A. Surya Prakash, former chairperson, Prasar Bharati. He's a very, very renowned and eminent author, as well as veteran journalist, talking about the books that he has authored. Of course, one of the bestsellers being on the emergency itself, The Emergency, Indian Democracy's Darkest Hour, and also the other bestseller of Dr. Prakash, Surya Prakash, has been What Ails Indian Democracy. And I'm not going to dwell much on what led to emergency. Let me quickly go across to our very, very special guest on the show, Dr. Surya Prakash. Namaskar. Thank you very much, sir, for joining us. And 25th June, midnight, that's when the country woke up to this most shocking piece of news. And I believe you then were a journalist. And yes, when you just quickly go back, was this a bigger shock? Perhaps, maybe some expected it, considering the way Allahabad High Court then, questioned the electioneering process of Indira Gandhi, or considered it null and void, called it malpractices, so on and so forth. Was it actually Allahabad High Court observations that triggered emergency, or much part of it was attributed to JP's revolution call?
Yes, there was JP's revolution call, but before that I will say that, this June 25 marks the 45th anniversary of that terrible day in our democracy when we virtually lost the core of our constitution and our democratic way of life. That is June 25, 1975. And in the run-up to that, you see, there was a lot of disagreement between the Indira Gandhi government and the opposition in regard to many things that are happening in the country, including price rise and so many other issues, lack of governance and so on, in many states. And as that was building up, side by side, the election petition case was being heard in the Allahabad High Court. So, Justice Jagmohan Lal Sinha gave the verdict on June 12, 1975.
Okay.
Where in that verdict he held her guilty of corrupt electoral practice. What that meant was that under election law, there are certain things which you can do and you cannot do. Certain expenditure you can incur, you cannot incur. And the individuals who can work with you on the campaign. For example, the election law prohibited government servants from campaigning for political parties or candidates. So all this was violated. That is what the judgment said, and therefore she was unseated. This was on 12th June, and that came as a very big shock for her. Meanwhile, the agitation was building up against her government. And this happened immediately. What the Congress did was to organize rallies at her residence, saying that Indira ji, you stay on in office, don't care for this judgment and so on. In the run-up to that, she had been having a running battle with the judiciary and raising issues about the right of the judiciary to question certain laws made by Parliament and so on. So this came as the ultimate thing as far as she was concerned, confrontation with the judiciary. It virtually became a head-on kind of thing. Justice Sinha, on an application of a lawyer, stayed his judgment to enable her to move the Supreme Court, which she did. But what happened in Supreme Court was that Justice V.R. Krishna, who was the vacation judge, he posted this case to a larger bench, but while doing that, he told her that she cannot vote or speak in Parliament. So he was staying the operation of the Allahabad High Court judgment subject to these two conditions. That the Prime Minister cannot vote in Parliament or speak in Parliament. So immediately the opposition and then Jai Prakash Narayan was leading the movement against corruption and so on. All of them said you must resign because no Prime Minister who does not have the capacity to vote or speak in Parliament can hold that, or no person who doesn't have that capacity can hold the office of Prime Minister.
Right.
But people around her said nothing doing, you must stay on, otherwise this country, it'll all break up and
it was clamor for power of the then Prime Minister Indira Gandhi and her coterie, and the way they always also interfered in judiciary.
Pardon?
The way they also interfered in judiciary then, her coterie along with Indira Gandhi herself wanting to stick to power. And also, sir, if you could quickly talk about the role played by her son then, Sanjay Gandhi, at that point in time, unconstitutionally.
Yes, and also in the run-up, let me tell you, in 1973, she superseded 3 judges and made Justice A.N. Ray as the Chief Justice. So, her battle with the judiciary was on for some years before the Allahabad High Court judgment came. But anyway, the other thing was the role of Sanjay Gandhi, her son. He was belligerent, and he always believed that whatever the party felt or whatever the Prime Minister felt must be done. And there are no excuses, and there are no don't throw the rule book at me kind of attitude. And so he started mobilizing the party men, and they started holding rallies every day around the Prime Minister's house saying, don't give in to this. So this went on until the Ram Leela Maidan meeting. It was a very big assembly, which was addressed by Jai Prakash and Morarji Desai and others, calling for her resignation. And that was it. By then she had made preparations, and everything sort of fell into place in terms of her plans on how to deal with this on 25th June 1975. As regards 25th June, let me tell you, that morning she called Siddharth Shankar Ray, who was the Chief Minister of West Bengal. The country needs a shock treatment. These were her words, which Siddharth Shankar Ray has recounted before the Shah Commission, which probed the excesses of the emergency.
What did she mean by the shock treatment? The country was already reeling under the shock of emergency.
Yeah, but according to her, the opposition was disrupting governance and disrupting her right to govern the country. That's how she saw it. And so she said the country needs shock treatment. And then he said, okay, I'll get back to you. He came back at 5 in the evening and said, you can use Article 352 because their internal disturbance enables you to impose an internal emergency.
Yes.
So she started working on that and said, come on, let's go to the president. She took Siddharth Shankar Ray to the president. President Fakhruddin Ali Ahmad explained the whole thing. He said, all right, you please send me your letter and I will deal.
Sir, I want to ask you this here as we move on. Did she enjoy the popular support of her government, in the sense there were also many Congress leaders who were vehemently against this decision of Indira Gandhi, and I believe they were also shown the exit door. But largely speaking, what was happening within the realms of Congress, barring Indira Gandhi and her son Sanjay Gandhi and the coterie close to her? But there was this outer circle of the Congress or the government in that point in time. They opposed it.
I will say that the Congress party, even at that time, it comprised of a lot of honorable people, but gutless people. They were very honorable. A lot of them had fought for this country's freedom, or they were the children of our freedom fighters. They knew the value of our constitution, our democratic way of life. But a person who is a union minister, that office he holds, when that becomes more dear to him than the country's constitution and democracy, then this is what happens. And secondly, there was a lot of fear. They were afraid that if they opposed her and Sanjay Gandhi, they themselves could land up in jail. In fact, that was the climate at that time. And therefore, many of our cabinet ministers were very scared of her and very scared of Sanjay Gandhi. So when she
Okay.
went to the president and came back at 5 o'clock, after Siddharth Shankar told her maybe at 6:30 she met the president, came back, they drafted everything, and then nobody knew anything. Then she said, Siddharth, you tell me, I don't want to consult the cabinet now, okay? And this has to go to the president. I want the emergency imposed. So how do we do that? So he said, see, under the rules, there are 3 ways of dealing with this.
Okay.
The first category is that it does not require cabinet clearance.
Approval.
There are certain decisions you can take in government which does not require cabinet clearance. So this is not in that category. Then there is another category where it requires cabinet clearance. Then there is a third category where you can do something and then post facto go to the cabinet for approval. So I will put this in the third category. We will say that this falls in that category. So you go and recommend this to the president, let the president issue the proclamation, and you call the cabinet afterwards.
Yes. So sorry I'm interrupting you here, sir. Was this, or can we also look at it as a consequence of a legal incident? For example, since you were also a journalist way back in that, if Allahabad High Court episode would not have happened, so emergency could not have happened, or maybe the rift within the Congress and Indira Gandhi losing that popular support or grip on her own leaders or leaders of the different political parties, her defeat was imminent.
I would say that if you say the Allahabad High Court judgment did not happen, it had to happen one way or the other.
Okay.
Let us say it was put off by another year. The judge took 1 more year or 2 more years. But the confrontation with the opposition was such that I think she would have in any case headed towards imposing an emergency even without that happening. But maybe it would have got delayed by a few months because the confrontation was of such a nature. But coming back to this, so she did not consult the cabinet that evening. Brahmanand Reddy was the Home Minister. There was a Minister of State called Om Mehta, Minister of State for Home, who was in her inner circle. So Sanjay Gandhi, Om Mehta, R.K. Dhawan were sitting and drawing up the list of political leaders who have to be arrested that night. And Om Mehta was parked in the Prime Minister's house. But his boss, Brahmanand Reddy, knew nothing about the imposition of emergency, though he was the Home Minister. He was summoned at 10:30 and they gave him a sheet of paper, they had typed something, that is letter to the president, and asked him to sign it. He was the Home Minister and it was not on the letterhead of the Home Minister of India. It was on a plain sheet of paper. And that went to the president. Indira Gandhi's letter went to the president. And when it went to the president's secretary, I think Mr. Balachandran at that time, he deposed before Shah Commission. He said he advised the president not to sign it. Because in his view, this matter must go to the cabinet. He said, sir, unless you get the sanction of the cabinet, it is the Council of Ministers which must advise you, not the Prime Minister. You have to act on the advice of the Council of Ministers. This must go to the Council of Ministers. So let it go and come. Afterwards, you can take a view on whether to sign or not to sign. So the president seemed to agree with him at that point. But a few minutes later, Indira Gandhi sent R.K. Dhawan to the president. And God knows what she communicated. And in a few minutes, the president signed the proclamation. And that's how the emergency was imposed. And that night, Jai Prakash Narayan, Moraji Desai, a lot of people were arrested. The proclamation of emergency was done with such secrecy that on the morning of 26th June, when the cabinet was called at 6 a.m., there are a lot of people in government and in the civil service and so on who knew nothing about it. Actually, many of them, like the law minister, Mr. H.R. Gokhale, the home secretary, cabinet secretary, they all, got calls between 4:30 a.m., 6 a.m. They had to jump out of bed and rush to the Prime Minister's house. In fact, the home secretary learnt at 6 a.m. that a cabinet meeting is on. That is when they went there that they realized that an emergency has been imposed.
Very interesting. I think these are the facts which never came out in open. Only Dr. Surya Prakash, in that book that you're carrying right now, I'm sure it must be on your table. If you could also show that book to our viewers. And as we zoom in and focus on that book, that what transpired in late Prime Minister Indira Gandhi's house, in her office, in her residence, is what Dr. A. Surya Prakash's this book also talks about. Let's hear it from himself. Sir.
Yes. So, that night they called the Home Minister at 10:30 in the night and informed him that they want to impose an emergency, asked him to write a letter to the President now. Meanwhile, Om Mehta, R.K. Dhawan, Sanjay Gandhi and others were sitting and drawing up lists, as I told you, of persons to be arrested, political leaders to be arrested and where they are and all. So this was going on. Meanwhile, Indira Gandhi called the party president Devkant Barua and said, help me draft my speech for next morning on All India Radio. So she said, you and Siddharth Shankar Ray sit with me and we have to draft the speech. So I am told this went on till 3 in the morning. There is evidence before Shah Commission, and actually Catherine Frank has also referred to this in her book. So then what happened? This was going on. Meanwhile, Siddharth Shankar Ray, when the process was more or less, her speech was ready, Siddharth Shankar Ray stepped out. Then Om Mehta took him aside and said, I have to inform you that they will cut off electricity to all newspapers tonight. And they are going to lock up all the high courts tomorrow morning. So Siddharth Shankar Ray was flabbergasted. What, you are going to lock up high courts? What are you doing? And cutting off electricity. So he said, I want to meet Indira Gandhi again. By then she had gone in. So they said, no sir, I think she is resting. Because she had to, again, 6 o'clock, there was a cabinet meeting. He said, no, I have to see her. Meanwhile, Sanjay Gandhi came there and he heard that Siddharth Shankar Ray was objecting to this, and he blasted him and said, you people don't know how to run this country. And he was very angry because Ray was interfering in that plan. But Ray kept quiet. Then he waited. Indira Gandhi came out again. Then he told her, what is this? And I'm absolutely shocked. What is this going on? She said, no, no, that should not happen. I'll come back. So she went in, probably to talk to Sanjay Gandhi. And then when she came back, it is said that her eyes were red. And Siddharth Shankar Ray said that I think she was in tears and something hard had happened. And then she said, Siddharth, no, electricity will not be cut off and the courts will not be closed. You don't worry, you will not be locked up. Don't worry. But the newspapers along Bahadur Shah Zafar Marg, electricity was cut off. But fortunately for us, the High Court gates were not locked up next morning. I am just narrating this to tell you what can happen when democracy derails. What can happen? What kind of ideas spring into a man's mind when democracy derails? We should never forget these things. In fact, the Shah Commission held Naveen Chawla, who was secretary to the Lieutenant Governor, callous, indifferent, unfit for any public office. After that, Shah Commission indictment, unfit for any public office. And you know why he was unfit for any public office? The superintendent of Tihar jail told the Shah Commission that the secretary to the governor told him to put all the political prisoners in jail in cells made of asbestos. In the month of June, the jail superintendent said, sir, how will they survive? He said, bake them. Put them in asbestos cells, bake them. And the troublesome ones, put them in the lunatic cell. This was the instruction of Naveen Chawla vis-a-vis the political opponents of Indira Gandhi.
No, but this amounts to blatant violation of human rights. Are we talking about Nazi concentration camps?
No, exactly. It was something like that. And Naveen Chawla was secretary to the Lieutenant Governor. The Lieutenant Governor later told the Shah Commission he was damn scared of his secretary because Naveen Chawla was close to Sanjay Gandhi and every day he used to go and meet Sanjay Gandhi. So he told the jail superintendent why this happened was the jail could take some 1,900 inmates. They arrested some 3,500. So the jail superintendent said there is no place. So Naveen Chawla said build some cells in with asbestos.
Yes.
And the jail superintendent said, how can anyone survive under that in this month? He said, bake them, throw them in lunatic cell. Now this man who said these things, and this is on record in the Shah Commission, and the Shah Commission indicted him and said he is unfit for any public office which demands fair play and justice and so on. And he said he was callous, indifferent, what not. It's a wholesale indictment of Naveen Chawla. Now such a person, what did you do afterwards? Prime Minister Manmohan Singh made him an election commissioner.
Election commissioner.
A man who has no faith in democracy was made the chief priest of democracy in that sense. And later he went on to become the chief election commissioner. As I want Dr. Manmohan Singh to say this to this country, that he should never have appointed Naveen Chawla. Naveen Chawla has not apologized till today for what he has done. Nor has Manmohan Singh, or nor has anyone in that family. They have always tried to defend what has happened. And many of the people like Bansi Lal and V.C. Shukla and all were reappointed as ministers when Indira Gandhi came back. This is the most shameful chapter in our country's history. And we should never forget and we should never forgive.
Okay, so now coming to that question of press freedom, I was just reading some articles. Civil liberties were restrained, human rights violations, freedom of press was majorly curtailed, and all the articles had to go through, or perhaps all articles had to be vetted by INB ministry then, before they actually saw the light of the day in the press next day. So was it a one-sided, I want to know, sir, you were a journalist then, was it a one-sided press, or there were certain independent publications, newspapers, journals, who had the audacity to raise the voice against emergency, against the dictatorial regime of Indira Gandhi?
This is a fact which will stun people. The chief censor in Karnataka was the Inspector General of Police. I was a correspondent of the Indian Express in Bangalore.
Okay.
And there was pre-censorship of Indian Express. Everything we wrote, all the editorials, all the opinion pieces, all the reports, everything had to be censored by the Inspector General of Police, who had a battery of police inspectors and information department officials. They would scan everything we wrote, and the typed copies would come back with them deleting paragraphs or words or this, that.
Okay.
They did not want a single word to go against the government. Okay.
That's murder of freedom of press.
Complete, no, not just that. The contempt which Indira Gandhi and the government had for media is depicted in the fact that a person in uniform, जो बंदा वर्दी पहना था, उनको chief censor आपने बना दिया. Can you imagine? He was, in those days, there was no DGP of police. The IGP was the head. So he was the chief censor in Karnataka. Like that, they appointed chief censors everywhere. All kinds of people. And un logon ka zulm, like they would come to newspapers and say, what is all this going on? And they wouldn't allow something to be published and whatnot. Apart from that, some other things happened. One, she repealed what is known as the Parliamentary Proceedings Publication Act. I forget the correct name of it. We used to call it the Firoz Gandhi Act, because her husband Firoz Gandhi had introduced that to protect the press when it published parliamentary proceedings. Because until that act came into being, we could be prosecuted, for defamation and so on, for reporting parliament. So Firoz Gandhi had brought a law to protect the media. The first thing she did after imposing emergency was to remove that. Then she brought another law which permitted district magistrates to raid newspaper offices if they felt that we were publishing something which would cause public
outrage,
disorder and so on. So, and then many journalists were arrested who were seen to be anti-establishment. Another thing they did, they took the list of all newspapers. V.C. Shukla was the minister in those days.
One article says a number of activists and journalists were arrested under the Defence of India Rules and Maintenance of Internal Security Act. MISA, Maintenance of Internal Security Act. This is what she triggered to justify her arrests or the way the journalists were apprehended?
There were 2 laws used by that emergency government to jail their opponents, whether they were politicians or journalists or whatever. One was MISA, Maintenance Internal Security Act. The other was Defense of India rules. Under these 2, they were all put in. Now, but that was just the beginning, because there are a lot of things that happened vis-a-vis Parliament, the judiciary, apart from media that we are talking about, which had terrible consequences. For example, in Parliament, she had a massive majority in Parliament.
Okay.
Nobody had the courage to stand up to her or object to what she was doing. So a lot of laws came in. For example, the 39th Amendment. The 39th Amendment was introduced by her. The whole amendment was meant to protect her and to get her out of the election case which she had lost in Allahabad.
Okay.
So that amendment said that no election petition can be filed against a person who is Prime Minister. That Parliament will create another body which will examine that and so on. So this was one. Then there were some other things in that provisions. Apart from that, she brought an Election Laws Amendment Act, where for example, Jagmohan Lal Sinha said that a government servant, no government servant, that is the law, can campaign and so on and so forth. So the election laws were amended to overcome that and given retrospective effect. Similarly, election law was amended in regard to some money spent by her, some arrangements made for her rostrum and this, that and the other for her public meetings, which was in violation of the law. So the law was amended and amended with retrospective effect. So she did all this and brought the 39th Amendment. And in my view, this amendment, actually, you see, I call it the fastest constitutional amendment in our nation's history.
Okay.
And why was this overspeeding? For example, on 7th August, it's introduced in Lok Sabha. Our constitutional amendment process is very complicated. You have to give notice to MPs. And after some days' notice, it must be introduced in the House. After introduction, there is a cooling period for MPs to examine. Then it comes for consideration. Then it comes for passing. Then it goes to the other house. Again, in the other house has to give notice. And then there is a cool-off period. Then it is for consideration and passing. Now, all those rules were suspended.
Okay.
On 7th August 1975, in the Lok Sabha, the 39th Amendment was introduced. And usually under the rules, after it's introduced, as I told you, another date is fixed for discussion after some days. The House has given time because they must digest that. No? It's a constitutional amendment. But it's discussed on 7th August itself. A cursory discussion takes place, summary discussion, and House passes it. On 8th August, it's introduced in Rajya Sabha. Again, no cool-off period. It discussed in Rajya Sabha, so-called discussion, passed. Now, there are certain amendments of the Constitution which have to be ratified by state assemblies. This was not such. So, Indira Gandhi, those were days of one-party rule virtually. All the state assemblies were summoned on Saturday, 9th August. So, 8th August is passed in Rajya Sabha, taken up by all state assemblies in 9th August and passed unanimously. 10th August, Sunday, this president is a rubber stamp president. He is working on Sunday for her. So he signs the notification. Sunday, the 10th August. So why are you overspeeding? That is because on 11th August, the Supreme Court was to hear her case. So on 11th August morning, the government advocate, the Attorney General, told the Supreme Court, Your Lordship, the 39th Amendment has been passed and, assented to by President, and it's all notified, everything. So the courts, so that amendment said the court cannot hear election petition against the Prime Minister.
So basically, everything from press freedom to cabinet, sham of a cabinet, everything was scuttled.
Everything.
Now, from the politics of it, moving on to the popular sentiment against Indira Gandhi, that perhaps in those 21 months reached its peak. And before she went for the repeat elections in 1977, did she misinterpret the mood of the people, or was she confident that she will be able to retain the power, the seat of power? Did she fail to understand the mood or the sentiment of the people?
I think she totally failed to understand the sentiment of the people. And the reason is what she did to the constitution. Because with those changes that came about, she virtually shut up one institution after the other. So you don't get a good feedback. And there is this fear across government offices everywhere in the country. The fear of police, the fear of government officers. And I'll tell you a lot about that later. But anyway, coming back to that, we'll finish off some of the other amendments to Constitution.
Okay.
40th Amendment, anti-media law, put in the 9th schedule. Again, to keep it away from judicial
process.
Then 41st Amendment said, and luckily this was passed by Rajya Sabha but didn't go to Lok Sabha, no civil or criminal proceedings against Prime Minister once he becomes Prime Minister. So luckily that didn't go to the Lok Sabha. Then we have the 42nd Amendment. In my view, this is really very frightening because there are a lot of things in 42nd Amendment. The main aim was to throttle the judiciary. And the 42nd Amendment said high courts cannot examine the constitutionality of central laws. You see, the powers of High Court under Article 226 were curbed. Then the Supreme Court's powers were curbed. Then what they did, two other amendments I'll tell you, which people will be shocked. They must know what can happen in a dictatorship. One, the 42nd Amendment authorized the President to amend or make changes in the Constitution if he felt there was need for some change for 2 years through an executive order. I told you what a rigmarole it is to amend the Constitution of India.
Yes.
All that is put away. Through an executive order, the President can amend the Constitution. This is really frightening. This is exactly what I think Hitler did. I have to say a couple of things about the 42nd Amendment. The most horrendous amendments in my view which came through the 42nd Amendment was one amendment to the Constitution which abolished quorum, because under our Constitution, the Constitution stipulates 10% of the House to constitute quorum for Lok Sabha, Rajya Sabha. So the 42nd Amendment abolished the quorum, which meant 1 or 2 MPs could gather in the chamber of the Lok Sabha, Rajya Sabha and make a law for the entire country. So this was something which was absolutely preposterous. There was another amendment which was made which was equally preposterous and which goes against the very grain of democracy. That amendment said that the President can amend the Constitution or make changes in it if he felt the need to do so for 2 years from the date of this 42nd Amendment through an executive order, which meant through an executive order the President could amend the Constitution. This had happened only in Hitler's Germany. Now, this 42nd Amendment was a major assault on the judiciary. And the Indira Gandhi government was hell-bent on crippling the judiciary after the Keshavananda Bharati case, in which the majority held that Parliament could amend any part of the Constitution, but it could not disturb the basic features or basic structure of the Constitution. And then certain judges listed what constituted basic features, and that was kept sort of open-ended so that the Supreme Court could add many other elements to that, and it has done over the years. So the Congress was most unhappy with this because they said under Article 368, the government, the Parliament has the power to amend any part of the Constitution any way it wants. And during the debate on the 42nd Amendment, there are many members of the Congress party who virtually threatened the judiciary. Here is a quote from C.M. Stephen during the debate on the 42nd Amendment. He says, now the power of this Parliament through the 42nd Amendment is declared to be out of bounds for any court. It is left to the courts whether they should defy it. I do not know whether they will have the temerity to do that, but if they do, that will be a bad day for the judiciary. The Committee of the House is sitting with regard to the inquiry into the conduct of judges and all that. We have got our methods and our machinery. This was an open threat to the judiciary in the country, and he says, uses words like temerity. He said, do you have the temerity to challenge Parliament? Then there were many others who were unhappy with the Supreme Court's view vis-a-vis the unalterability of the basic structure of the Constitution. So Swaran Singh, who headed a committee which proposed terrible changes to the Constitution, he says in Parliament, unfortunately the courts transgress the limits prescribed for them. It is a crude sort of invasion. N.K.P. Salve said, in the life of every nation, there comes a time when the Constitution has to be saved from the court and the court from itself. Priyaranjan Das Munshi, he says, until and unless we have the capacity to change the class character and concept of judicial wisdom of the country in regard to the central laws and the state laws, this will continue. This will continue, meaning the interference by the judiciary will continue. These are the kind of threats and opinions that were held out by members of the Congress party in Parliament against the judiciary.
Could she manage to just... Okay, go ahead, sir, please.
So, the... no, but we haven't... You see, we have spoken about the Parliament. How a Parliament which was under her thumb was made to do all kinds of things. But the worst that happened was what happened vis-a-vis the judiciary. So there, the most important case is the what we call the Habeas Corpus case. You know, in the Habeas Corpus case, the Mr. Advani, Mr. Dandavati and all who had been arrested under MISA had moved the high courts. So the Supreme Court aggregated all those petitions and heard it. It was a 5-judge bench headed by Chief Justice Endre. The other judges were Justice H.R. Khanna, Justice Beg, Justice Chandrachud and Justice Bhagawati. It is a 5-judge bench. The question was, now what they had challenged was the President's order suspending our fundamental rights during the emergency.
Yes.
So that was the question.
Right.
So the government said, no, the President has the power to suspend fundamental rights. What are those rights? Article 14, equality before law and equal protection of the laws. Article 19, which gives us, you know, Article 19(1), freedom of expression and speech, our right to freedom of expression, freedom of movement, freedom of trade, and then
except for right to life, everything else.
Article 21, right to life and personal liberty, also suspended.
Also suspended.
So this was what the 5-judge bench heard. Then what happens? Justice Khanna asked, I'll just read this out. People know what happened in that court at that time. Nirende was the Attorney General. And Justice Khanna put this question to him.
Okay.
Nirende said the President's order of June 27, 1975 suspended citizens' right to move the courts for enforcement of fundamental rights. which included Article 14, 21, 22, etc. Justice Khanna asked him, so Mr. Attorney General, if a policeman were to shoot dead a citizen in a police station, does that citizen have no relief? So the Attorney General said, my lord, it shocks my conscience and it may shock yours, but there is no relief so long as the emergency is on.
Okay.
So if a policeman shoots you dead, there is no relief. Now, Justice Khanna dissented. The other 4 judges upheld the government's view that
Okay.
the right to life and personal liberty, etc., can be suspended during that time.
Suspended too, correct.
And Justice Beg said, while defending the government position, we understand that the care and concern bestowed by state authorities upon the welfare of detainees who are well fed and well treated is almost maternal. He said Indira Gandhi is taking care of all these political prisoners like a mother, is almost maternal, and they're all well fed and well treated. Even
Acha.
parents have to take appropriate preventive action against those children who may threaten to burn down the house. This was
Okay.
Justice Beg. Later, Justice Beg went on to become the Chief Justice, so also Justice Chandrachud and Justice Bhagwati. Justice Khanna was superseded in January 67 because of this judgment. Supreme Court gave its judgment in the Habeas Corpus case and said that so long as the emergency was on, the citizens no longer had the right to assert their fundamental rights. Jai Prakash Narayan said, the judgment has put out the last flickering candle of individual freedom. Mrs. Gandhi's dictatorship, both in its personalized and institutionalized forms, is now complete. During the emergency, as many as 1,11,000 persons were detained under the emergency during MISA and Defence of India Act. So, to sum up, I will say a few things. This is what Dr. Ambedkar said in the Constituent Assembly. And we should always remember this in order to preserve our democracy.
Sure, sir.
No man should be grateful at the cost of his honor. No nation should be grateful at the cost of its sovereignty. You know? No man should be grateful at the cost of his honor. So all of them said, Indra Mata, she is Durga, she is this, that. She is the one who will help us get out of our wretchedness. Without her, India will collapse. You see, it's doomsday if Indira Gandhi were to go out of office and so on and so forth. That is why I'm quoting this. And, you know, this is very important for us to remember, and more important, never forget the core of our constitution. Article 14, equality before law, equal protection of the laws. Article 21, right to life, personal liberty. Article 19.1, all the guarantees, freedom of expression, movement, freedom of trade, profession, etc. Freedom of conscience, to choose, to practice your religion of choice, etc. These are all basic fundamental freedoms. We must guard it with our life. We must guard our constitution with our life. That is the lesson of the emergency. Come what may, that these are things, this is non-negotiable, this democratic way of life and this constitution. And come what may, we must preserve it. We should never, ever get into that situation ever again, because these stories are all horror stories. Once, you know, the train goes off the track, there is absolute horror. So that is true of democracy also. We must always keep it on track. And last point I will say, the perpetrators of the emergency, till today there is no remorse. They have never apologized. Even today I demand as a citizen of the country, I want to see an apology, an unqualified apology, not just from the Congress party, but those who still survive, who perpetrated all those terrible deeds at that time. And As far as the people are concerned, I will say, never forget and never forgive. I find, Indians have this great tendency of forgetting and forgiving, even when you are not even asking for forgiveness. This should not happen. If you want to preserve your constitution and your democracy, you must be very clear about it, and you must defend your constitution. With your life, you must defend it.
With those extremely strong words that the people of the country, though many decades on, 25th June 1975 and now 25th June 2020, the people of the country have not forgiven, have not forgotten the death knell of Indian democracy, that point in time which was triggered by Indira Gandhi, the former Prime Minister's emergency at that point in time, though it only lasted for 21 months, after which resulted in a massive downfall. And we will continue this discussion further, and we will continue to talk about the other high points of the democracy, the emergency. But we're very glad to have such a freewheeling conversation with you, Dr. A. Surya Prakash, former chairperson of Prasar Bharati. Thank you so much, sir, for sharing these insights, your experiences, the first-hand accounts as a journalist. You were working with Indian Express at that point in time. I think these are the gold mine of information and giving insights to what exactly happened way back in those 21 months and thereafter. Thank you so much, sir, for talking to National Broadcaster Doordarshan. Namaskar.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Come on boys, let's go practice.
अरे रुक यार, मेरे बैंक अकाउंट में गलत एंट्री का प्रॉब्लम हो गया है।
अरे तो बैंक को कंप्लेन करना।
बैंक को लिखे 1 महीना हो गया है, बट वो गुगली पे गुगली डाले जा रहा है।
तो आरबीआई के बैंकिंग लोकपाल को इन्फॉर्म करो।
रुक, मैं समझाता हूँ। जैसे क्रिकेट में थर्ड अंपायर, वैसे ही आरबीआई का बैंकिंग ओम्बड्समैन। आरबीआई कहता है अगर बैंक आपकी कंप्लेंट को 1 महीने में नहीं सुलझाता तो आरबीआई के बैंकिंग ओम्बड्समैन में कंप्लेंट करो। यह आरबीआई का आसान तरीका है आपकी कंप्लेंट